360. Zurück ins Leben. Komm mit mir auf eine Reise. Eine Reise zu mehr Energie und fantastischer Gesundheit. Ich möchte dir das Wissen und den Mut vermitteln, den ich gebraucht hätte, als ich ganz unten war. Dabei will ich dir helfen, wieder richtig in deine Energie zu kommen. Zurück ins Leben. Hello and welcome to the Buyers 360 podcast. What is the common denominator of chronic disease today in the industrialized nations? What is our current understanding of immunology based on? Can we actually get healthier by social distancing? And how much does our biology depend on touch, connection, and communication? About these and other topics, I talk with Dr. Zack Bush, and I'm very proud to have this conversation with him, and I found it to be very inspiring. And without further ado, please enjoy that episode. Hi, Zack. Nice to have you on the show.
Nice to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. I've been waiting for months and months, and I've been kind of going over this interview over and over again, like months ago, and but things have changed dramatically since since I actually tried to getting in touch with you and kind of try to plan for this interview, because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about glyphosate, gut connection, but also more into like human touch, connection, connection to Mother Earth. And now we are in a worldwide phase of social distancing and blaming little critters for all the evils in the world, and we are willing to do whatever it takes, even if it costs a lot of lives and break down our economies and everything. So things have changed dramatically. But maybe before we jump into this episode, maybe you can just introduce yourself a little bit to my audience.
Wonderful. Yeah, it has been an extraordinary chapter for humankind for sure. And I think there's silver linings behind, the misinformation and mistakes we've surely made at the many levels, both medically and at the political levels. But I'm very, eager to see the positive ramifications of this, because I think the world is responding in a positive fashion behind the scenes. I think people are rising to connect more aggressively to rearrange their priorities and the rest. So I look forward to the long-term, social implications as we start to set a new normal. That doesn't mean going back to the old. For myself, I'm a medical doctor. I was trained at the University of Colorado in Western medicine, MD, and then from there went to the University of Virginia, spent 10 years there. I was in internal medicine, which is general hospital care, outpatient care, and did all the subspecialty, rotations through that internal medicine experience. Ultimately went on to subspecialize in endocrinology and metabolism. During that time, I got into cancer research and chemotherapy development. And my chemotherapy was in vitamin A compounds, and that indirectly over the years got me into nutrition. And nutrition science got me into, kind of a perfect time of my career in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, got me positioned for an explosion of science that would happen in the microbiome as we started to uncover the secrets of bacteria, fungi, and the extraordinary relationships between this microbiome within our gut and the skin and all of our organ systems. It was just a beautiful moment to be. So in 2010, I left the university setting and started a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease through food. And that journey ultimately took us into the soils. And we have developed a lot of science around how soil microbiome produces medicine for the human system. And then we went on to, figure out that, there's no amount of dietary supplements I could make to heal the world. And so while the dietary supplements have been extraordinary short-term solution for our patients and for our customers around the world, it's been a more, potent message that if we don't change our farming system, agriculture system worldwide, we're going to go extinct. We are threatening the health of the planet and humanity, as well as losing, extraordinary amount of life on Earth over the last 40 years of chemical agriculture.
Yeah, so quite a journey from cancer research to coming to food, bacteria, fungi. I think that's kind of where I want to go today with you, in a kind of improvised fashion, to talk about the microbiome, fungi, bacteria, because we are in this period of like demonizing little entities that actually are a part of us. That's the way I see it, and that have been probably a part of like Earth forever, so, but maybe let's start like what do you think is the status of health today in our modern world, and maybe even compared to like West and third third world countries or other continents, and what is we have a lot of chronic diseases, obviously today, especially in the West and the industrialized countries. But what is like the common denominator of all these modern diseases?
Yeah, so at the root of all chronic disease, each chronic disease, whether it's a degenerative neurologic condition like multiple sclerosis or ALS or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, all of these conditions named, they've all been mapped back to shift in the microbiome at their root. Cardiovascular disease, cancer, all shift in the microbiome years before there's chronic disease evident in the humans. So clearly we've disturbed the organic garden of the human experience. We've just disturbed the soils of the earth and the soils of our gut, such that we're not growing healthy humans anymore. And so that chronic disease epidemic is most obvious in developed nations, and certainly the chronic disease epidemic has hit children particularly hard. In the United States, we have 1 in 36 kids now with an autism spectrum disorder. We have 1 in 8 or 1 in 10 kids with an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We have 1 in 8 or 1 in 10 kids with an asthma condition. They can't breathe well. We have 1 in 4 children that are affected by seasonal allergies or food allergies that are severe enough to change their daily health. We have 1 in 3 with obesity by adulthood in the United States now. 1 in 4 of those will have diabetes. We have 1 in 2 American adults with cancer now. Europe is lagging behind those numbers. Fortunately, Europe has done a better job maintaining the food system, but they are certainly worse off than the developing world. So
no, we're just lagging behind 10 years after the US. We're copying you. Like
actually, the 10 years is actually very accurate. You're right, and the growth curves of those chronic diseases 10 years ago in the US look a lot like Germany does right now. Germany is certainly leading in obesity in Europe, in a lot of ways. But UK is no longer in Europe, I suppose. But the UK is ahead of Germany, I think. But within the EU countries, there, Germany is there. Italy is coming on stronger now, and so we have a real collapse of human health. But there's a deeper problem, which is human fertility. And over the last 40 years, we've seen a 52 to 57% drop in sperm counts in all Western nations. And we now have 1 in 3 males that have a low enough sperm count to be infertile. And that's 1 in 3 males of reproductive ages. So we are really looking at the end of a species if we proceed down this current avenue. We can predict that in the next 70 to 100 years, we would expect human extinction to occur from catastrophic collapse of nutrition. The farming industry thinks that at our current course of loss of soils around the earth, we have maybe 60 harvests left on the planet before we have completely destroyed soil ecosystems. And so 60 years left of food to produce, 70, 80 years left of human biology. Our health collapse is ultimately a symptom of the biologic collapse as we put so much pressure and destruction on the physiology of the planet.
Well, these are grim perspectives. I had interviews with Stephanie Seneff and Dietrich Klinghardt, for example. They both kind of going in the same direction, making also good
Yeah.
projections in the future. And yeah, I don't think that many people are aware of this, you know, because we are in this kind of logarithmic curve in the
Yeah.
upswing, you know, which is kind of still relatively low. It's already quite kind of high, you know. Okay, you put like high numbers, you know, 1 out of 36 children are autistic and everything in the spectrum, whatever that means,
Yeah.
and so many other things that you just said, you know. But still, it's like you go on the street and it's not like everybody's appears sick, you know. If you talk to people, which I do because health is my thing and everything, so many people that claim they are completely healthy, if I talk to them like 10 minutes, they're not healthy anymore. And it's not because I'm projecting something on them, and you just ask some questions and then things are popping up. So
I think there's a phenomenon of normalization, right, where we don't see obesity as unhealthy anymore. We've had so much obesity that we just see that as a normal variant now of biology. And we think, well, that's my normal as a body, is to be obese or to be lean or whatever. And so we've with 1 in 3 people obese, it stops being a disease. We just see it as the normal environment. And, you know, if you go into parts of the United States where we have, 60 to 80% obesity, it only takes a few days for your eye to get used to that. And you forget that people are diseased there. And when the recent statistics in the United States through Medicaid screening of children is that we have 52% of kids with a chronic disorder or disease. And every time I say that, everybody's like, there's no way that's possible. There's no way 52%. And I was like, well, the children, do you know anybody with eczema, asthma, allergies? And they're all like, oh yeah, of course. Like, all the kids in the neighborhood are at that, and gluten sensitivity. You just name some of the common ones: obesity, precocious puberty, and suddenly everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even think of those as chronic diseases." I've come to normalize that children just have eczema and asthma and allergies, and we don't realize that it is really significant undermining of biology, which is predisposing those kids ultimately to cancer and other, life-threatening chronic diseases down the road.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Obesity is not so obvious in France, like if you go to the US, but my daughter, for example, like half of her friends, they're kind of mentally suspicious. So it's just some little things that are going on.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things. What is like there's you talked about so many different conditions. Like, what is the common denominator there? What is the connecting link?
Yeah, so the connecting link comes down to basically our relationship with the outside world. And so there's no human immune system per se. That's been a misperception in medicine for a long time. The immune system is a relationship with the outside world. And without the outside world, our immune system dysfunctions. And so the immune system is really a series of relationships that are critical to our understanding of self-identity. And at the boundary event, if you will, of that self-identity is the gut lining, as well as the pulmonary lining, cardiovascular lining, all these things. And so the common denominator, I would say, of chronic disease right now is the loss of that self-identity. And our lab has been working for the last 8 years to really understand, what are the mechanisms by which we lose this cellular boundary, this boundary event between the gut and the outside world, or the sinus mucosa and the outside world. And interestingly, that the microbiome is the predictor of that, and that the microbiome is nursemaiding or taking care of this boundary event at the gut membrane, even at the blood-brain barrier, kidney tubules, all these boundaries that are critical for self-identity within these compartments is eroded or vulnerable once you lose the microbiome. So the microbiome is your first level of human identity maintenance, in the sense that their little molecular communication network helps inform the extracellular environment on how to make the protein scaffolding, the Velcro that holds that whole system together. take an antibiotic or eat a food system that's full of Roundup, which is an antibiotic, and you denude over time your gut bacteria, your microbiome diversity, and you become vulnerable at the tight junction, the Velcro between the cells. And as that vulnerability happens, it can be very easily exploited by Roundup, which is a direct toxin to those tight junctions, causing leak across your gut, leak across your blood-brain barrier, leak across your kidney tubules, so you can't detox the body. So this kind of cascading events from glyphosate are, number one, as an antibiotic, making you vulnerable. Number two, direct injury to that self-identity. And so once that gate is opened up, now you've got a flooding of not just all of the toxins. There's 64 herbicides and pesticides in a glass of California wine today. And so you've got this, deluge of chemical overwhelm to the system. But behind that, you also have organic material that shouldn't be getting through that line. Things like insoluble fibers in kale and Brussels sprouts and the like. The fiber is supposed to be compartmentalized. Soluble fibers should go into the body, and insoluble fibers really be much heavier represented within the gut. And it has important anti-cancer effects, really super healthy, unless that gut is wide open. And now insoluble fibers and other, macro carbohydrates can get into the system that weren't supposed to be there. And so we're in this constant overwhelm, and the portion of the immunity that is on the human side starts to get overwhelmed, and you start to make antibodies to everything, including your own body. And that's where we developed this high rate of autoimmune disease. Starting in 1995, 96, we start going steeply up with autoimmune disease, which is, of course, 1996 was the year that we created genetically modified Roundup ready crops and started spraying corn, soybean, alfalfa, sugar beets, and all the rest with Roundup directly over those coming years. In 1992, in the United States, we started spraying wheat with Roundup to dry it quicker. It was sold as a desiccant or drying agent. And that's exactly when we started gluten sensitivity. And so Germany and Japan and many other countries following behind them have been at the forefront of outlawing the import of any American grain crops. And it's because they've realized that those grains contaminated with Roundup are extremely damaging to the system.
Yeah,
it's ironic.
That's why we bought the company now.
That's ironic, right? I think there's a lot of pushback from the German people, and if we're going to outlaw this thing in our country, how are we making billions of dollars selling this to everybody else in the world? So I think there's an ethical dilemma there for Germany right now, and they inherited an ethical dilemma from us in the United States as we dumped those chemicals into the world. The United States now makes that glyphosate molecule from every chemical company. It's not just Monsanto and Bayer, but the chemical is actually, the bulk on the world market is made in China. And so Chinese companies, and China is unfortunately now under the heaviest usage of Roundup in the world. And we see the consequences in biology, which is a stress signal. We call them viruses, but viruses are just genetic stress signals within the microbiome. And so we see not just, COVID, but we see, 12,800 new viral outbreaks around the world since 1976, when we started pushing this Roundup chemical into our system. So it's been a vicious, journey. 1976, we debuted it as a weed killer, and it started being used widely in Canada, US, and parts of the EU in 1976. And then by 1996, we genetically modified the crop so we can directly spray everything. So that's been the journey. And, I think this chemical has become the most ubiquitous toxin on the planet. We're now producing over 2 billion kilograms of glyphosate a year. And putting that into our soil and water systems. And so that is a devastatingly, vast chemical exposure for the microbiome. We are damaging microecosystems, not just in soil. It's a water-soluble toxin, so it gets scooped up out of the soil with rain or irrigation and pushed into our freshwater systems, killing fish and wildlife there, and then creating dead zones in our oceans at the mouth of those rivers. The dead zone at the end of our largest river system in the United States, which is the Mississippi River, that dead zone is larger than our entire state of Rhode Island. And when I say dead zone, there are no fish there. You can't, we've put millions of dollars of fisheries out of business because the fish have simply died. the threatened zone of damaged water systems in the Gulf of Mexico is larger than our state of Texas. It's a massive, area. The damaged water system can be seen from space now quite easily through satellite imaging. You can see, oxygen damage to that ocean. But the telltale signs of that damage is algae blooms. And so every summer we get these huge algae blooms in the Gulf of Mexico and the damaged water systems. And in this last year, in 2019, we had the largest algae bloom recorded in history, which went from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the west coast of Africa. A single bloom of algae traveling along the current that runs from the Gulf of Mexico across the Atlantic Ocean. And so we've taken the toxicity of American farm fields and stretched it all the way to the west coast of Africa now. And so we're damaging, fish and water systems across that entire ocean.
Wow. Okay. So that was quite a blast. That was something that you said in the beginning, which I found super interesting. I want to go back to this. You said there is actually no such a thing as a human immune system, which might come as a surprise for many people, but it makes so much sense, because we have this myopic point of view, for 500 years, at least since the 1900s, when Pasteur and Robert Koch and these folks, discovered bacteria and then started with vaccines or whatever. Actually, in the entire immune system, all the vocabulary around it is the vocabulary of war, because that was where they were coming from. Europe, right. I don't know you guys, but Europe has been a mess for forever. There was just no time without war. The longest time without war is actually the last 40, 50 years. We had that's the longest period we ever had, before it was just like war all the time. So these people came from this kind of perspective. And I know from many parts of my life, especially also the podcast, I talk to many people, and I talk to great experts and scientists and everything. But I also noticed everybody who has a topic has a certain perspective on things. So if you come out of your time, whatever, and you see critters and you say like, oh, there is a disease, and then you define something. So they went so easily to the conclusion that this is actually the cause of a disease. Like we're again in this, where are you dying with corona, or are you just having some sort of a virus, some RNA, some RNA, how you say, small pieces of RNA, whatever.
Yeah, RNA genomic information there.
Floating around, which is not the only one you have anyway. So you said there's no human immune system. There is a relationship with the outside world, and we're just about to cut that. Like, how are you seeing that? How impactful can it be if we're starting? And this is still in France now. We're in like it's just 4 days that actually we can go out without having an authorization and stuff like that. But still, people are heavily masked and having a huge distance. I'm technically not allowed to go to the beach. I don't know if I can infect the fish, or I don't know what the problem would be there. But what is your perspective on that kind of move to go further away from nature, go further away from other people?
Yeah, we've done everything wrong on this one. The science of today is much different than you've heard from the World Health Organization or the CDC or the NIH that's all over the news all the time. Our regulatory bodies are about 20 to 30 years behind on the science, and so and that's common. Like, it's the same thing for doctors. Like, as soon as we make a major breakthrough in basic science understanding in cancer, it's another 20 years before that's affecting a clinic that's 5 feet away from the lab that it was discovered in. So the movement of scientific information and paradigm shifting things is painfully slow. And I think hundreds of thousands of people are sickened or die every year due to that slow movement of information. And really the problem is psychological, right? The technology could change overnight. The mindset of the physicians, scientists, and regulatory communities take 20 to 30 years to change. And so, I'm very concerned, for the population. The place where they've done the most, aggressive effort to lock down before this infection got out of hand was New York City, because we could see what was happening in Italy and everything else. And so we locked down aggressively. And New York, nobody's walking in New York now. You've got empty Times Square, and yet they have the highest mortality of any place else in the world. And so it's obvious, at the public health level, that the science of the last 30 years is right. The more isolated you get away from your environment, the more vulnerable you are to dysfunction. And this is not just at the biology level. Interestingly, we think of ourselves as biologic cellular beings, but in fact, we're atomic beings, right? We're made out of atoms that then compose a molecule. There's billions of atoms in every single cell. Atoms, it turns out, have to obey the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the most, incredibly well-studied, perspectives in science. And the second law of thermodynamics is that anytime you isolate a system, it becomes more chaotic. And so we know at the fabric level of a human being that when we isolate anything, if we isolate a single cell, it becomes cancer almost immediately. We can show this in our laboratory. As soon as you show a gut lining glyphosate and you break apart all those connections between all the gut lining, all the cells, by a day later, they all look like, cancer cells. They've got fibroblast shapes. They've lost their cytoplasm. Like within minutes to hours, you're creating a cancer-like environment by isolating a cell. And at the human level, at the whole biology level, you see the same phenomenon. If you take yourself out of the environment, your reactivity to the environment, your immune dysfunction, if you will, increases rapidly. We know that viruses are best controlled by bacteria and fungi. And so bacteria and fungi make all kinds of co-repressors and enzymes that chop up the DNA of viruses and all the rest. Viruses are not even part of the microbiome. They're not living entities. They're just genetic transfer of information. And so we have miscategorized them as germs. We've miscategorized them as some sort of part of the microbiome. They're not at all. They're the way that eukaryotes, humans, multicellular organisms like your dog, your cat, and the earthworms in the soil, we communicate through these genetic mechanisms that we call viruses. And so when we so damned the viruses and started to apply understanding of bacteria to viruses, we made some major mistakes in our philosophy, I believe. These viruses travel through the air and in aerosols, and so and they can also travel in respiratory droplet, but it's the aerosols that make it cover the planet quickly. And so, a new virus that comes out every single year, we usually have, a few thousand that we'll recognize, but, I'm sure there's billions, if not quadrillions of new viral genomics, in any given agricultural space by the year. I mean, the rate at which the microbiome is producing genomic information is staggering. And so both human systems and microbial systems are always putting out this genetic information. If we show vulnerability to a relationship with that genetic information, it's because we can't handle the stress level that's being, signaled in that thing. The virome is always pushing for adaptation and biodiversification. Adaptation and biodiversification is how we've recovered from all of the previous 5 extinctions on the planet. When the planet goes into a massive extinction event, there's so much biomass that is returned into the earth, and yet the genetic information through the virome is preserved. And as soon as the conditions change, asteroid hits, destroys the ecology for a few million years, 100 million years, whatever it is, it took Earth, our last great extinction was 55 million years ago. So it took Earth, some tens of millions of years to redevelop biodiversity. It was the virus communication network that allowed that recovery to happen. And interestingly, every time we've had a great extinction event, biodiversity happens more aggressively on the backside of that. That makes a lot of sense once you figure out that viruses as a genomic bank for the planet will increase their level of misspelling and their effort towards new variants depending on the stress level. So if you have a big extinction event, the stress level of the biology goes skyrocketing up as life disappears. And now the genetic information has seeded brand new ideas on genetic swapping, gene spelling, and everything else. And there's a large portion of that that's going to then build a new foundation for new life. So when I hear that there's a new virus, as long as it's not the military trying to kill me, if there's a new virus, I want it. I want that genetic update. I want the genetic information because of the simple reality that I want to be in line with the adaptation energy of the planet. I want the microbiome to inform me. If it is, an artificial compound, which I don't think it is, I'm not concerned about this virus at all. This virus is showing much less mortality than any of the previous coronaviruses out there. It's showing, I really think we have missed the boat on this thing in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, influenza is killing about 10 times more people on a typical year than this coronavirus has. And I'm so grateful for that. This coronavirus has not been, a massive death toll for the planet as we feared it would be. And so we should be very grateful. But what we have is a new genetic signal. And this new genetic signal is interacting with our biology. But we're not dying from a virus. The people that 200,000 or 250,000, whatever the number ends up being, even if it's 500,000, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the usual death toll of influenza. Yeah. And so the people that are dying from this condition are interestingly showing up in hospitals without any signs of infection. They don't have fever. They turn blue. And then days later, they get fever and pneumonia from fluid that's now filling their lungs a few days after they turn blue. And so I've been working on the physiology of this for months now, but the interesting phenomenon that we see happening is that the virus binds to air pollution. There's a very particular component of air pollution called PM 2.5, which is the measurement of the particulate matter in the air pollution. And PM 2.5 has been shown to be able to bind to coronavirus and influenza. So now the air pollution becomes a concentrator of the viral information. Without air pollution, the amount of virus in the air is quite dilute. And so you would breathe it in, you'd get a small amount of genetic update, your body would adapt to that genetic information. If you have high concentrations of air pollution in northern Italy, for example, Germany, parts of Iran where they're having trouble, UK, New York City, Seattle, Louisiana, all these places where we're seeing the highest death tolls across the world, certainly Hubei province being, example number one with the highest rates of PM 2.5 air pollution in the world. These epicenters of the condition are because we have artificially consolidated the genetic information. So we created particles in the air. It clumps the virus. The virus now binds in an overly, concentrated form to the lung, and still it does almost nothing to the vast majority of people. They might get a few days of fatigue. They feel headache, a little brain fog. They have to sleep more, and then they're better. They don't even realize they were really sick. And then for some people, a few days after that, they'll get some fever, feel crummy for a couple of weeks, and then they get better. Very small percentage of people are showing up blue and then dying subsequently of multi-organ failure. So that group is showing an increase in receptors in their lung. And the things that increase receptors for this virus are two different drug categories: antihypertensive blood pressure medicines called ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers. These two classes of blood pressure medicine upregulate the receptors in our lung for this virus. So anybody who's being treated for hypertension has got that. Anybody who's being treated for hypertension in Western medical systems is also typically being treated with a statin drug for cholesterol. Statins also upregulate the ACE2 receptor in the lung. So we've now see that there's going to be a population of elderly people who have been diagnosed with cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, or diabetes, and they're dying at very high rates because those three diseases, kidney disease, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, have to be treated with an ACE inhibitor and a statin. And so the pharmaceuticalization of our diseases, which are all environmental, it's unhealthy food systems and lack of movement, and then we get hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and then we put them on drugs that are going to upregulate the receptors to this very virus that's natural to the environment. We've had coronaviruses in the human circulation for definitely 740 years, but there's good data that the first coronaviruses that were documented were 1,200 years ago in the human population. So for hundreds, if not more than 1,000 years, we've been dealing with coronavirus, but we've created an artificial pharmaceuticalized lung that's going to receive this at a high dose. And then we put air pollution to carry even higher dose in. So it's a combination of air pollution, viral production, and a pharmaceutical lung will suck in an abnormal amount of this. But it's still not that that's causing the damage, because this virus, again, doesn't make you turn blue. It doesn't cause hypoxia. So what is causing that? It turns out that PM 2.5, air pollution, binds to cyanide. And cyanide poisoning looks exactly like the way people are dying right now, which is they turn blue or they turn cherry red. And then after turning blue, over the next couple of days, the hypoxic injury to their lungs, to their liver, and to their kidneys leads to multi-organ failure. The lungs start to fill with fluid. They get secondary pneumonia, and they die of pneumonia and secondary bacterial infections and organ failure because there was initial cyanide poisoning. And so that's the model that I'm now working with. It's the best one out there that I can find as far as how patients are actually presenting. Interestingly, this is not new. If you read the accounts of the people on the front lines with SARS in 2002, the patients turned up blue, their lungs filled with fluid a few days later. They then got fever and pneumonia and died of multi-organ failure. And so 18 years ago, we saw the same phenomenon, but we didn't think outside of the box and really figure out why that was happening then, because we kept ascribing all of these horrible things to a virus. The amount of things that have to go wrong for your body to stop carrying oxygen at the red blood cell level are pretty intense. And there is no virus out there that has enough genetic information in it to create that. Remember, it's just genetic information. It's not a toxin. The virus cannot directly attack human biology. It can only add new information to human biology. And so it can't single-handedly change the shape of hemoglobin. It can't single-handedly change the inflammatory cascade and cause blood clots and everything else. It's cyanide or other toxins in the air pollution that are capable of poisoning thousands of pathways within the human system to induce all of these downstream effects that you're seeing. And so we have to stop believing that a virus is even capable of this level of damage. It's not. Even something like HIV or Ebola, those have to have preceding injuries to the environmental changes to the genetics of the individual before those viruses can even participate in a fatal event. And the gene that chops up HIV, hepatitis C, all the herpes viruses, that gene goes defective and can't chop up the DNA. Now you can't be in a healthy relationship with a viral genome. And that gene is blocked by many environmental toxins, glyphosate being among them. And so when in 1976 we started adding chemicals that would screw up our normal relationship to the genetics of the planet, we would start to see an increase in viral presence in the body. And so we saw hepatitis C shoot up, we saw HIV shoot up, we saw all the herpes viruses increase. All of that happened not because our immune system went down in the classic sense of the immune system, antibody production, all that was still cranky. What changed was our genetic balance, our genetic homeostasis with this viral genomic world outside of us and within us. We now know that humans were built by viruses. More than 50% of our genome was built by viruses that left their DNA in our system. Over 10% of our genome is made by retroviruses like HIV. And so we are the result of viral intelligence. We are the results of viral updates to what would become the mammalian genome. And we are the same as all of the other mammals. We share 20,000 genes with pigs, bats, all other mammals. We share 20,000 genes. We only have 20,000 genes. And so that means every single gene in our body can be found, in another mammal. In fact, it not only are the genes all similar, they come in almost the same spelling. And so if you just clip the human genome into 178 puzzle pieces, you can rearrange that and then read it from front to back without a single error, and you've got a pig. And so we are a pig, just slightly rearranged. Mm-hmm. And some of you are looking at your spouse saying, not so much rearranged, you're pretty much a pig. But there's this reality of like, you've got this situation where we are a unified genomic plan. Life is very simple at the base. 20,000 genes is an impossibly low number, it seems like, for human beings. A fruit fly has 13,000 genes, and a little flea has 30,000 genes. And so we sit between a fruit fly and a flea genetically in regard to our genomic information that plans for a gene. Where we seem to exceed other species is in our previously believed junk DNA. So there's only, depending on what article you read, somewhere between 94% and 98.5% of our genome doesn't code for a gene. And so we thought it was junk DNA for a long time. But in recent years, the discovery of microRNA has come about, and we now know that 94% or 98% of the genome is actually coding for not a gene and not a protein thereafter, but these tiny little messengers in microRNA. And the microRNA are exuding out of our cells. Just as we exude RNA and DNA in the form of viruses, we also exude microRNA in clouds of information regarding how to manage that piece of information. I'm very confident that we will find microRNA within this coronavirus that is helping modify its behavior. And that's why many of us will take in the RNA of a coronavirus, and it doesn't suddenly replicate and participate in some illness or something else. We can take that genetic information in, acknowledge it, we can either ditch it or we can absorb that into our own genome, and we'll decide in which tissues we need that gene. When the microbiome becomes stressed, it's finding adaptation through the viral mutations. It's finding adaptation through the gene mutations within our microbiome itself. Long before we understood viruses, we understood that bacteria could exchange genetic information back and forth. It's called horizontal gene transfer. And so the archaea, which are the oldest bacteria on the planet, and then the bacteria after them, have been swapping genetic information back and forth by basically creating a little viral pod of new genetic information and transferring it sideways to all of its friends. This is how antibiotic resistance happens in a hospital or in a cornfield. Antibiotic resistance happens when a single bacterium that's under the threat of an antimicrobial finds a loophole or finds an adaptation to protect itself from the antibiotic. It can then pass that gene rapidly to all of its friends through horizontal gene transfer. Horizontal gene transfer is much simpler than a virus in that it doesn't require all of the mechanisms of protein shielding and all of that. It's simply one cell membrane basically creating an envelope to hand to the next cell, and so that little envelope can go and bind. Viruses tend to be a little more complicated in what types of proteins it wraps it around and all that, but horizontal gene transfer happens very fast. And so we have to come to terms that the new science is telling us that we are in constant relationship with our own gut microbiome, which vastly outnumbers our human cells. We're in constant relationship to the environment around us through genetic microRNA that are floating around, viruses that are flowing around. In the air, there are 10 to the 31 viruses. That's a 1 with 31 zeros after it. That's 10 million times more than our stars in the entire universe. 10 to the 31 viruses means that you never take a breath that's not full of viruses. Your body is in constant balance and relationship to those viruses. And your body is designed to take up that genetic information, not just through the lungs. You put a mask on, you've done really nothing to your ability to absorb viruses. Your body is designed to be a viral information download site. You can pull it in through your eyes, through your skin, through your ears. You are literally engineered to absorb virus because you need that. That's how you were built. And so to then damn this little virus as if it's causing some pandemic is a huge mistake of the science that we've learned over the last 30 years.
Wow, that was a very interesting new perspective on that topic. I didn't expect that. I mean, I can't see the relationship, and I'm really far away from just from my heart. I don't need. I actually need a lot of science for that. I just from my heart, from my intuition, I know we are going away from nature. We're going away from relationship, from community and things like that. And the further we go, the sicker we get. And now we kind of exaggerating that.
Yep.
and all this myopic view of the human body has not led us anywhere good in the past. You know, we can achieve some skills, you know, where we can manipulate this or that, you know, but whenever we manipulate something, it's never really it never has really a good outcome. I mean, we can maybe go to the moon or not, I don't know, but we can't cut an apple into two parts and just bring it together again. You know, we just can't do that. You know, that's where we are. So it's older, just a few hundred years ago. You know, for example, I mean, I'm German by nationality, and we used to have like these great thinkers, you know, like Goethe and Steiner and people like that. And they have been seeing the world with the human nature has always been a very important part of the perspective, of the perception. You know, Goethe, for example, he said, like, any science that doesn't take the human nature or the human into account is worthless, you know. So he was obviously an opponent of Newton, you know. So they had very different philosophies, you know. But this is where we came to, and we need to go back, but very like now to like more like a widened understanding of human nature, of nature by itself. And this is where towards the end of our interview I want to get to again. Like you said, you talked about the linings of the body, you know, which is the connection, which is either it's like the gut lining is super thin, you know, all the linings are actually super thin, and yet they are the point where we get in contact with the outside world. But we have a problem, which is toxicity. We're talking about glyphosate, but we talk even like the cyanide that you mentioned, but also heavy metals and stuff like that destroy these very, very subtle linings. Why is that? Is it like that? Why are we so subtle, so delicate in the head part?
That's a good question.
Is that has God made an error?
I love that question. I think that's very eloquent design by nature. So the gut lining is one cell layer thick of epithelial cells, the vascular lining endothelial cells, the blood-brain barrier endothelial cells, pulmonary, you know, protection to the outside world, epithelial cells. So these epithelial and endothelial cells are these boundary events. The gut membrane is one of the thicker ones. It's half the width of a human hair, 50 microns. And so half the width of a human hair is your entire protection from over a 2 tennis court surface area of your gut. It's this tiny little cellophane layer that's one cell layer thick. In the same way, your blood-brain barrier, you would think this is the holy of holies. This is your brain and your peripheral nervous system protected. And it's, 20 microns or 30 microns. It's, you fit, 5 or 3 to 5 endothelial cells in a single human hair. And so it's this, extraordinarily thin barriers. And so it does seem like really bad engineering unless we are supposed to be constantly in relationship to the outside world. And so I think it's telling us something of our necessity for the outside world. If we weren't supposed to touch the outside world, we would have, it would all look like skin. Skin's got, 15 to 50 different cells that are stacked on top of each other to kind of create this shell. That's not how the mucosal membranes, endothelial, epithelial systems work throughout the rest of the body. They're super thin, so that exchange can happen. You want this vast exchange of nutrients and water and information to be streaming in and out of the body all the time. And so it tells us something about our design.
What is protecting it? Like, it's apparently not built to be like a wall, like a protection. That's really not what it is. It's more on the contrary. Yet it needs to be integral. So what is actually
it needs to be an intelligent gatekeeper, and so it's instead of looking at it as a wall, I would look at it as basically a system of Velcro where it can open up and allow information through and then zip back up. And so the tight junctions allow for this really rapid transfer of large molecules. Small molecules come through the cells, large molecules come between the cells, And the body needs all of that. For you to get, good macronutrients and big fibers and proteins in the body, they'll unzip or allow those through and through. So it's more like border patrol than it is a wall. And so it's telling us something of the importance of import-export in the body, but it's also telling us something, very critical to biology, which is renewal. And so the gut lining is made brand new every 3 days. We turn over our whole gut lining, 2 tennis courts in surface area every 3 days. And so biology and life is one about constant reinvention. We have to rebuild ourselves all the time. And we don't do that in the mind. We get stuck in the mind and we do the same things. And so I think we need to learn something of biology is if you're not thinking new today, then you're not keeping up. The world is moving forward. Biology and life is marching into the future at an extreme rate. If you still think the same way you did 40 years ago, politically, socially, spiritually, then you are stuck and you are late in the game. You need to let go of all of your beliefs and all the things you're holding on to so that you can think anew today, because there's new information, there's new biology, there's new adaptation. Can you imagine, if tree frogs decided they were never going to change? They would have gone extinct forever ago. Tree frogs are still around today from hundreds of millions of years ago because they're constantly adapting. They're constantly developing new species or new adaptation skills within the species. And so the environment that is resilient has shown itself to change a lot. Humans have only been here for 200,000 years. We are a blink in time, and we're showing a very hard time in adaptation. We seem to be refusing to adapt. The biology of the planet is adapting fast now because we're in the 6th great extinction. If you're not changing your biology on a daily basis, then you're starting to increase your risk of death and extinction. How do you know you're engaged? How much time do you spend outside? Your connection to that nature that is now changing needs to be fluid. And some of you are thinking, well, this all sounds very intuitive and cool, but is it real? A great study was done a few years back and published that if you got more than 7 or 8 hugs a day, your risk of flu went down by 30%. That's the opposite of social distancing, right? And so the more connection we get, the more microbiome we touch, the more genetic information in the form of microRNA, viruses, and the like, the more diversity we get in the day, the less likely it is we're going to have imbalance with that environment and manifest a disease. What we know now by, if you don't want to die from a corona, related death, then don't go into air polluted spaces. And when the government tells you can go back to normal, don't drive. Let's clean up our city air so that nobody's dying of cyanide poisoning anymore. It's not necessary. We know how to clean up the air. We know how to do clean transportation, but we just don't do it because we're lazy as a society. We are slow to adapt. We need to accelerate our rate of adaptation of new technologies, consumer products, freaking cell phones. These things need to adapt to biology rather than to, faster is better, great. We need to figure out how to do this kind of communication through a biologic process, which is totally in front of us. This is how fungi communicate over extreme distances through soil, through fiber optic systems. And so nature created fiber optics. We didn't. We're mimicking nature in our creation of fiber optic. Every single cell has a fiber optic cable system of tens of thousands of cables that go between 2 cells to let light, energy, and information pass back and forth between the cells. And so fiber optics, we're late to the game. Nature's been doing that stuff for a billion years. And so we need to realize that nature already has the methods for global communication because it did it. That's how life got created, was through global communication. We need to start inventing communication networks based on biologic systems, energetic, real physics systems that are in line with nature. And 5G is a very concerning phenomenon, but it perhaps is going in the right direction if we stop trying to go against nature and go with nature. Nature's got a frequency by which we can communicate and communicate within her biologic benefit. I think if we do things right, in the next 20 years, we could have telephones that improve your health. The frequencies coming out of those could actually resonate at a frequency that improves biologic function rather than creating, genomic injury and oxygen deprivation at the cellular level, which was currently what 5G radiation can do. And so we need to release our hold on our control of nature and let nature inform our future. And if we do that and we let go of our past, belief in technological development and the march for faster is bigger and is better, we will find some really eloquent design for not just, communication, but for energy sector, for education, for sociopolitics. We need to learn something from the microbiome. We know that a healthy microbiome and therefore a healthy global immune system is 100% defined by and dependent on biodiversity. Sociopolitical world would change if biodiversity and connection was our primary goal, rather than confiscation of wealth from other countries and sequestration of resources beyond our needs. That's currently how empires have risen and fallen over and over again. So we will continue to rise. The United States is an empire in fall, and there's going to be another empire to replace us, or we could create a new social political awareness that we are all human and we're going to go extinct in the next few decades if we don't change our behavior. And we need to do it as a planet, not as a nation. We each need to start to really go past our governments, and we need to start creating non-governmental organizations that would allow humans to come up with a regenerative plan for our energy sectors, our science and medicine, our technology of communication. All of this needs to come about, and I think it's happening. I'm seeing signs of people reaching past their governmental boundaries to say, let's do this right. China, I am so appreciative of your scientists and your transparency. You were so much more honest than the United States was during this pandemic. You put out the best numbers out there that should have helped us save thousands of lives. We didn't pay attention. We accused you of lying, everything else. I honor the scientists there in China. You guys have put out more good science on what's going on. You've helped me figure out, this model, and I'm frustrated with our medical system in the United States. So I just honor you in China right now. I honor all of the doctors and nurses on the front lines that are dealing with patients dying because they're being handed the wrong model. It's so terrifying to be a physician or a nurse and see your patients dying in front of you. There's nothing you can do because your tools don't work because they've given you the wrong model. They've given you the wrong resources to work with. You need to think of this as a cyanide poisoning. There's a simple solution for cyanide poisoning. It's 3 quick injections. You could reverse the syndrome in 10 minutes. So exercise it. There's no downside of doing a cyanide kit. There's no side effect concerns there. You'll change the shape of hemoglobin for a few minutes, and you can help restore the oxygen delivery to that human in a matter of minutes, and not 6 weeks on a ventilator. And so we need to hand you guys the right tools to help these patients recover quickly, and there will be no hospital crisis when we put the right tools and the right model of physiology. The physiology is not one of viruses. The physiology is too much pharmaceutical adaptation to a chemical environment. Too much pharmaceutical change in our lungs, leading to an absorption of toxins within our air. We are killing ourselves. We are not dying of a virus.
Okay, Zach. I want to respect your time. You have a meeting coming up. Just one last thing I wanted to talk about. You said just right in the beginning for our conversation that you have some hope that there's like some good positive things actually developing. And you said like we need a new way of thinking. We can't be stuck like 40 years ago. And actually, I mean, we're kind of running out of time, as you also mentioned in this podcast. So where is that the explosion of a new consciousness or something like this? Is that the hope that everybody was waiting for 2012 or something like this? Is it actually happening now, or are we doomed and going down now?
If we had to create a new consciousness, we'd be completely screwed. There's no way. Humans are not capable of creating love, let alone creating consciousness. We can experience love and we can experience consciousness, but we can't create it. I believe that consciousness is, a vibrational, information stream. Consciousness is the information stream from black holes, through vacuum space and the rest. consciousness is the knowledge of life itself. It is the knowledge of spiritual singularity, you know, and this is not something we need to create, nor can we create. And so if we had to like go create the new consciousness of the human species, you know, I want people to let go of the belief of human consciousness just as much as I want them to let go of the belief of a human immune system. Consciousness, like the immune system, is a continuum. It is always there. There's always relationship in nature, and therefore there is immune function. There's always consciousness, therefore there is always the opportunity to rise. And so as a human species, we could transform immediately, overnight, without any, you know, intense new philosophical learnings or education, if we would let go of the human constructs of sociopolitical differences, religious differences, and the rest, and realize we are all trying to tap into a single consciousness. It is the consciousness of a tree. It is the consciousness of Saturn and the sun, solar systems, galaxies, and beyond. That vibrational information out there is all we have to tap into. We do that every day through our intuition. You said earlier, I don't even really need all of the science. I kind of know what we're doing right now with this pandemic is wrong. Everybody does. Everybody senses like, this can't be right. We can't really have to go hide away in our houses for the rest of life to be healthy. That's going to kill all of us. You don't need to be a scientist. You just need to be a mom to figure that out. What happens if you make your kids stay in their room all the time? Well, they're going to go crazy. They're going to tear the house apart. They're probably going to kill you eventually. That you can't contain human life in isolation because the chaos level has to go up because of the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah, and so even for the weak, for the elderly, it's devastating.
It's a death toll for the elderly. We know that forever. Isolation is the way to accelerate death. And it's tragic that we've struck so much fear and with misinformation in the hearts of nurses. There are 0 cases in the countries that have paid attention. There are 0 cases of hospital-acquired COVID. It's because it's not a virus that's killing these patients. It's a toxicity. They're dying of toxin overload, not from a virus. And so the fact that we have these nurses and doctors isolating patients in ICUs, won't even go into the room unless they're in a spacesuit, is stupid. The patient is not producing cyanide. The patient is not producing the chemical stew that created their death. We have the wrong construct, and therefore we're overloading our hospitals. If these people were just seen in the emergency room, given a quick, you know, detox, you know, kit, and then sent home for observation, there would not be a single overloaded hospital in the system. By our misperceptions that the microbiome is attacking us and that we have to fight back, and then that's a terrifying, you know, weapon of mass destruction sitting in these patients, that's all a lie. None of that is true. None of that is borne out at all. And yet patients are dying alone. And that's the humanitarian crisis that we have going on, is we have elderly and we have even young people that are now dying without human touch, without being able to look into the faces of their families and friends. They will be buried in mass graves in some countries because we are told that the body is somehow too toxic to touch. That is BS. There is no way that that is how biology works. And so morgues need to like function like morgues. You don't have to like body bag these things like biohazard, you know, disasters. That's not what's going on here.
All right. So yeah, I hope we can get to this kind of new, or well, the oldest understanding. I mean, we just got to go back to where we've been, like
go back to where we've been
20, 30,000 years ago. That's all it needs. Be in connection with Mother Earth, with animals, with other humans, be in touch, just live a healthy and natural human life, actually. You know.
And we have the opportunity to rise quickly at the political level too, because we have, 400, indigenous, kings, queens, leaders around the world still. We've got hundreds of nation state leaderships that are still tied to their indigenous roots, and they may have Western, leadership in place next to them or alongside them, but the wisdom is there. And I don't think we Paleolithic belief system or something. We need spiritual philosophy blend with the physical sciences such that we understand them both better. We keep keeping them apart. We keep isolating them from one another, and we suffer for that confusion that somehow spirituality is separate from biology. They are singular. They are made of the same fabric. We are spiritual beings, and I am just honored to be with 7 billion souls on earth, including everybody here in the audience. I'm so honored to be with you, because this is the connection. This is the opportunity we have to transform one another through communication and care and love for one another.
Yeah, and I think communication is probably the most important part. I mean, we can't even communicate to our wife or to our spouse or our children in a non-aggressive way, you know. So that's where we kind of start learning. This can be learned like in a few weeks or in a few months, you know. Just do a course or something like this, buy a book, start communicating with your direct environment. If everybody did that, the world would be changed like in a week.
That's right.
Because that would be instant, you know, instant, complete, different. If we stop projecting on each other, you know, if we get empathy, you know, then we're getting closer to each other, and then so many things will just fall apart, and will fall into place, you know.
That's it. Yeah. That is beautiful. I think you're spot on. It will happen instantly if it's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Let's brace for it and do whatever we can.
That's right.
Zack, thank you so much for this conversation. Where can we find you on the internets?
Sure. ZackBushMD.com is my education website. It connects you to a lot of my projects. IonBiome.com gives you the science of the communication network of the microbiome and how it repairs those boundaries that we were talking about. It's a dietary supplement line with a lot of science there that we've been working on for the last 8 years. That can be ordered in Europe most effectively through iHerb, IHERB.com, or through the UK at myhealthbasket.com. And so you can go after those products cheaper through those pathways in regard to shipping. But the science is really dense, and if you go through the Learn pathway and read all the science studies we have, there's eight or so studies there, both in peer review and white papers and all of that to help you understand your own health and the health of your children and the health of your families there. And then our nonprofit that's working to retrain farmers around the world to transition away from chemical farming is at farmersfootprint.us, farmersfootprint.us. And so it's an easy place for you to get engaged with this farming revolution as we go into a regenerative belief system about how to produce healthy foods. And so all of our companies ultimately feedback to support this nonprofit system, and we would love your support and help in getting that message out to the world. Included in there is non-toxic neighborhoods, which is a project that we've been helping scale up this year. It was developed with a toolkit so that your city or school system can ban Roundup and other noxious chemicals from use in your playing fields, soccer fields, and the like, football, if you will, as you're going through that effort to clean up your environment. Those playing fields, cityscapes, transportation systems, they're a huge place where glyphosate is used liberally. And so we've got a toolkit there of organic alternatives to Roundup and other chemicals for your cities and municipalities and school systems to clean things up. So that's nontoxicneighborhoods.org website that you can get through the Farmers Footprint pathway as well. But those are tools that we would love for you to deploy there in Europe to clean up your environment.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So Zack, thank you so much for all your great work. It's really impressive. And I've been following you for a couple of years, and really appreciate all your work. And thank you for being on the show.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for having me on. Really a pleasure to be with you and your audience. Thank you.
I wish you a great day. Bye.
You too.